Live from Nowa Huta.
It's the podcast from the Novohood.
Check 1 2 1 2. Oh, okay, we're on. So, welcome to the third podcast of the Nowa Huta Meetup. Instead of doing a weekly, we're doing a monthly. Every first meetup of the month will be one with the microphone on to discover interesting things from several cultures and languages. And today we are going to talk about food, music, and literature, basically the three ingredients that you need to understand one's language or culture. And of course, we're not going to talk about Polish culture because that's where we are transmitting from, but we are going to talk about all these foreign cultures and languages that we are talking about. With me right here in front of me is Miss Joanna. And Miss Joanna is actually specialized in both Romanian and French. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say yeah. Hi guys, by the way.
Joanna, let's start with Romanian.
Yep.
Do you listen to Romanian music or do you read Romanian literature?
I actually do listen to some, but like if you happen to heard Manele, which is like let's say Euro disco or Polish disco polo mixed with some pretty strange stuff. Romanian folklore is quite good. If you happen to know Gheorghe Zamflet, who used to play piccolo, like he's the most famous one, I would say, like worldwide known. And I would recommend some Moldovan stuff also, like Zdap și Zdup. It's mix of rock and folk music. Really good one, nice lyrics, good videos, funny videos.
Let's turn to books or literature. Is there anything noteworthy coming from the Romanian language, meaning Romania or Moldova?
Yep, definitely. Ionesco. So that's what we call in French théâtre de dérision. Quite gloomy, but there's a certain playing with words, I would say. It's mostly about the absurd. So he used to write pieces like theater, mostly, and I would highly recommend it. Like probably everyone knows like a lesson, La Leçon in French, because it was actually written in French. Really short piece, really short one. You can also see it, I would say, in Ludowy. Probably, yeah. So if you like some gloomy stuff, but with some weird, dark humor, then check Ionesco out.
Last question. If I would go to Romania tomorrow and I would have to order something typically Romanian, what would you advise me to order?
So Mama Łyga, it's made of corn. Like even in Poland, we like in the communist time. But personally, I don't like it, so I would maybe go with sarmale. It's like leaves, like wine leaves or grape leaves, stuffed with meat and rice and some pepper, I guess.
How would you describe it in terms of flavor? Is it spicy? Is it full? Is it what kind of flavor? What can you compare it with?
It can be a bit spicy, and usually it comes with a tomato sauce. Basically, you can find it in pretty one every bar in Romania. That's a traditional, typical dish.
How would you say in Romanian? Romanian is the best country on the planet.
România e cel mai frumos țara în lume.
Thank you, Joanna. Next to me sits Viola. You are an ex-student of mine in Dutch, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And maybe inspired by the course or maybe not, but you decided to go to Amsterdam for a while. And a couple of years ago, you also spent some time in the United States. Where exactly?
Exactly in New York and Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, New York. So let's start with the United States. Let's start about Well, let's start about with music. Like, what kind of American artists would you say are really worthwhile? Maybe if you could know a couple, like specifically for New York.
I would highly recommend Drake. Also, I'm really fascinated about G-Eazy. It's not Jay-Z, it's G-Eazy. And I also like A$AP Rocky. Yeah, that's the top three for me. It's kind of urban. Yeah, I would say it's like kind of like the mainstream hip hop.
Let's turn food for a moment. If I would go to Brooklyn, New York, maybe not about the special dishes, but like places to go, like that's a cool place to go for to eat or to drink or to go out. What would you say is a cool place for that?
I would advise to go to the 23rd Street, which is near Times Square. It's two steps from Times Square. But I think there's the park nearby, and there's also a famous building, the Building, which is in triangle shape. And you can find there a lot of spaces for hot dogs. Actually, in the neighborhood, there's a really good pizza, which I highly recommend. I love the American pizza.
Is there anything from Holland to eat or to drink that you would really recommend, apart from the things that are illegal in Poland?
So I would recommend the bitter bollen, and it's like really round chocolate things which are filled with cinnamon and stuff like that. It's only during the Santa Claus days, but actually I wanted to grab it home, but it wasn't there. But it's really good. I highly recommend it. I loved it, and I could eat it. It has the dark milk and white chocolate, so that's the best thing I ate there.
You're talking about kruidnoten. So, bitterballen, for those who don't know, is like some kind of a meatball, let's say, with mincemeat inside.
Yeah, exactly.
And kruidnoten is like a cinnamon cookie with all kinds of chocolate around it. Last question, like a funny word either in English or Dutch that you remember or that sticks with you, like anything funny that you can mention at the end?
Goedemorgen. It made me laugh when I was getting on the tram, and the woman was telling me the Goedemorgen, and then I was like, it made me smile and made my day for the rest of it.
Because of the prefix.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I think that the positive vibes in Holland are remarkable, and it's really the best thing you can ever experience. Even I can really compare the New York to Amsterdam because it's really multinational, and I could feel in Amsterdam the similar things I felt in New York. It's really worth going to both places, and both places have the positive vibes, which I love.
Cool, because, originally New York was New Amsterdam, which brings the bond, of course.
True, yeah.
Thanks, Viola. We were in Romania first, and we were in New York and Amsterdam later. Right now, we are moving to Latin languages, specifically Spanish and Portuguese. But more than the language, which we focused upon the first two podcasts, now we are diving deep into local culture. So we're not talking about Portuguese, but we're talking about Brazil in particular. And we're not talking about Spanish. We're actually talking about Mexico right now. On my right side, I have Natalia. Left side, I have the well-known Guilherme, who was in the first two podcasts as well. We will hear him later. First, it's Natalia. The topic of today are food, music, and literature.
My favorite.
Your favorites. All right, so let's start. Which one of the three is your favorite?
The food.
The food. Let's start with Mexican food. If I, as a stranger, would go to Mexico tomorrow, what would you advise to order typical Mexican food?
For sure, you have to order tacos. It's like the best street food in Mexico. So when I went first time to Mexico, I had tacos for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is the best food that you can get at the mercados, at the markets. So definitely I recommend this. It's easy and it's delicious. It's tortilla made of corn flour, small, and you have on top of that you have beef some onions, guacamole, some salsa. Salsa is the sauce. And you can have many toppings actually. I think the best is el taco al pastor, which is actually not originally Mexican. It's from Lebanon. Immigrants from Lebanon brought tacos al pastor from Lebanon. Actually, the most famous Mexican actress, Salma Hayek, also comes from Lebanon. Not many people knows that. The other Mexican dish that comes to my mind is mole. Mole, for example, chicken mole. Mole is means this word mole means sauce.
Okay.
And this is the sauce made of chocolate, cardamom, cinnamon, and many breadcrumbs and many spices. Looks like chocolate sauce, but it's sweet and spicy at the same time. And you can have enchiladas with mole sauce or chicken with mole sauce. It's very typical. And Mexico is famous for fantastic chocolate. Chocolate actually comes from Mexico as well.
Chocolate comes from Mexico.
Yeah, it was actually chocolate seeds, cacao seeds were like money for Aztec people and Mayan people. So they used to have this chocolate drink during the most important ceremonies in Mayan culture and Aztec culture. So it's like a lot of history.
So from food we're going to history, which actually makes a little bridge to literature, because history is often connected to culture and history. Do you also have a couple of books or typical Mexican pieces of literature that you would recommend to read to understand Mexican culture or Mexican whereabouts?
The best way to understand Mexican culture is to read the books about Mayan culture, about Mayan gods, mythology, because still the Mayan mythology is alive in the people's life. Definitely, I recommend this. So definitely, before going to Mexico, I recommend to read that. And I also recommend to read books of Octavio Paz, which he wrote a couple of great books about Mexican cultures. I think it's the best introduction to the Mexican culture.
Which leaves us with music. Is there a Mexican type of music which really is typical for the country?
Of course, it's salsa. The music that you can hear in many parts of Latin America. And there's a lot of local types of music like mariachis, las bandas. It's like you can compare it a little bit to the Polish disco polo, which maybe somebody will kill me to say that, but this is the music that Mexican people dancing with this music. They're spending time listening to that music in the bars, on the street. So I recommend to everybody who goes to Mexico to go to the local taverna, local cantina, to dance salsa, to participate in karaoke events also, which it's a great experience.
You dance salsa yourself?
Yes, I love to dance salsa. Yeah.
Thank you, Natalia. So in terms of flavor, salsa and chocolate are quite different, but in terms of heritage, we now found out that it's from the same country, from the same place. Who would have thought? Now we are moving to our last guest of this Novohood podcast. Guilherme, you've been to the Novohood now plenty of times.
Yes, plenty of times. The best podcast and meeting Nowa Huta.
We're going to discuss 3 topics right now. It's food, music, and literature. Which one is your favorite?
Music for sure. Music's the best one.
So let's start with music. Typical Brazilian music or typical Brazilian artists? What would you say?
Well, of course, the most famous kind of music from Brazil is samba, historically speaking. But we have many artists from other styles also that are known all over the world. For example, Sepultura, the rock band that everyone knows, and we get a lot of pop artists also going abroad and getting famous all over the world. And we have also a very strong rap scene, actually, that is growing very much. So what I can say about Brazilian music is that the musicians from Brazil, the music movement usually comes from very poor parts or like parts that are having a lot of problems. So the music in Brazil comes as a revolutionary tool, as in many countries, of course. But in Brazil, I think it's very strong because we are constantly facing very bad situations. Like right now, we are having a very bad political moment and economical also. So we always have music to fight these bad times and also to raise the morale of the people.
You mentioned the current political situation and the troubled times Brazil used to have in the past. That kind of makes me wonder what kind of literature there is from the past century, let's say. Is there any writer or any piece of literature or piece of work in particular that you would say is worthwhile to read if you want to know about Brazil or its history?
Well, in the last century, we have some writers like Carlos de Andrade, romantic artists, romantic writers. They made like very good pieces of work, and we have like very good poets from Brazil. But something that I would like to recommend is a book named I don't remember exactly the name right now, but it's from Carlos Marighella, the manual of the guerrilla guy, and it was written during the military dictatorship times, and it's kind of a guide to survive the dictatorial movement, and it's a lot about resistance and it's a lot about fighting the bad moments. So I would recommend this book by Carlos Marighella for sure.
Last topic is food, something typically Brazilian like to eat. If I would go tomorrow to Brazil, let's say Rio or Sao Paulo, and I would go to a common typical Brazilian restaurant, what should I order?
Talking about food in Brazil is very, very, very hard because Brazil is huge and each part has its own foods, its own traditions. But something that connects the whole country is a combination of arroz e feijão, rice and beans. Whole country eats rice and beans. I would say this for sure. But a food that I would strongly recommend you is feijoada, which is some kind of soup made of beans with a lot of pork meat. And the magic about this food, about this dish, is that you have to eat until you are very, very full.
And you mentioned that Brazil being a very big country. Let's specify to your own region. First of all, tell me your own region, and then what's typical for your region.
Well, I am from the southeast region, especially more specifically from the state of Minas Gerais, and there we have a very, very important dish, which is pão de queijo, which is a cheese bread. So it's a must for sure. People from all over the country know these cheese breads. Even in Portugal you can find, and other places in Europe you can find. So things with milk, things with cheese are very common in my region, and I would strongly recommend pão de queijo, cheese bread.
Thanks, Guilherme. So let's move to Poland. Question whoever is first. Let's start with music. If there's something musical about Poland that every foreigner or every stranger should know about, what would that be? Raise your hands if you have an answer. Guilherme has something to say about Polish music.
Polish reggae is the best. I was so surprised I came to Poland and I found out there's a very strong reggae scene in Poland. So thumbs up for Polish reggae.
All right, so let's talk about food, and I think there will be a lot more suggestions when it comes from Poland. If a stranger comes to Poland, what should he or she order? Let's start with somebody who hasn't spoken yet. Chris, what would you say a stranger has to order in Poland?
Order come order. I order only pierogi ruskie when I go to bar.
Pierogi ruskie.
That's from Poland.
Oh, there's something else, someone else who wants to say something about food, and I think it's imported from Brazil.
No, I'd just like to say that everyone should eat jurek because I love it. And also a very interesting fact is that gołąbki you have also in Brazil with the name of charuto. So we have the same.
Okay, so let's start with the first one. He mentioned pierogi ruskie. You know what that is?
Yes.
Could you describe it to the listeners?
Pierogi ruskie is pierogi, the dumplings with potato and cheese, and in my opinion is the best kind. And onion, I forgot the onion, very important ingredient. and pepper, according to Dorota. And it was the best.
Second one is the żurek. What is żurek?
Żurek is a soup with the sourdough made of rye with eggs and sausage. That's what it is.
No potatoes?
Potatoes? There are some potatoes? No. It's only the sourdough.
Let's start. Let's finish with what was the first? Gołąbki. So we already had a description of Romanian type gołąbki earlier on in the podcast. What would your description of gołąbki be as far as Poland is concerned?
It's meat and rice wrapped in cabbage, like very similar to the Polish one, I would say.
This is how we finish up the third podcast, the podcast for the month of April. The next podcast will be recorded during the first Nowa Huta Meetup of May and will be broadcasted shortly after. This was the podcast from the Novohood. See you next time.